Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I specifically want to talk about why Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Masters, and why Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Performers, that's people who are traditionally called Dungeons and Dragons players. I think there's more to them than that, so I call them Dungeons and Dragons Performers. Why Dungeon Masters and Dungeon Performers, people who play Dungeons and Dragons, people who run Dungeons and Dragons, and people who play Dungeons and Dragons, why they should be very concerned about Disney's woes and the merging civil war within Disney. All right, so first of all, civil war in Disney, what are you talking about, Scott? Great question. Let's get into it. All right, so first of all, linked below is a video by Dan Murell. It's a half an hour long, but only the first 10 minutes of this have to do with Disney. But he does a absolutely fantastic job of explaining this emerging civil war in Disney. And basically, so Disney is run by Bob Iger. He was put back in after things went very, very wrong under Bob Chapek. And Bob Iger was brought in to make things better, but things got worse. Okay, and things got so bad that an activist investor showed up. His name is Nelson Peltz, and he is doing a proxy run on Disney's board, trying to fill seats on Disney's board. Right, this is like Wolf of Wall Street level stuff, right? And Nelson Peltz is attempting to bring in Ike Perlmutter, who is a disgruntled ex-Disney Disney executive who is influential in the Hollywood-changing mega success of the Marvel MCU. Okay? All right, so a lot here, okay? So all this is going on with Disney, and here we are, Dungeon Masters and Dungeon Performers, sitting over here looking at this like watching, sitting on the lawn on July 4th watching fireworks, right? But here's the issue. Fireworks, that's a nice celebration. That's not personal. That's not us. Is Disney's corporate woes personal to every dungeon master and every dungeon performer? Yes, in my humble opinion. Let me explain why. So first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here and discussing this with me. And the reason why is this is complicated. Nothing we're talking about isn't complicated. Disney's corporate structure is complicated. Dungeons and Dragons canon, which is what we're about to talk about, is extremely complicated. I actually think Dungeons and Dragons canon is the most complicated secular topic in the world. Harder than math. It's incredibly complicated, right? It's also very nuanced, and I'm going to tell you right now, I consider myself a subject matter expert in Dungeons and Dragons canon. I know more about Dungeons and Dragons canon than anyone on the planet, even people who work for Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. Why is that, Scott? Well, because they consider canon from the perspective, they consider Dungeons and Dragons canon from the perspective of the game, of a game. I don't do that. I consider Dungeons and Dragons canon as an attempt, a legacy attempt from Gary Gygax to fundamentally change how humans interact with intellectual properties. Right? So, and that allows me to look at D&D canon in a way that no one in the world has looked at D&D canon, period. Okay? So let me tell you why you as a dungeon master and you as a dungeon performer, in my humble opinion, need to care very deeply about the corporate woes of Disney. Let's get into it. So there's one reason, okay? There's actually many reasons, but there's only one reason enough for you to change how you feel and change from being indifferent to being highly invested in the fate of Disney, okay? All right, let me explain what it is. In my humble opinion, Dungeons & Dragons canon is deeply mixed, like a gumbo. I'm talking like boiled in the soup, mixed like a gumbo with Disney's canon. Okay? You're like, wait a second, Scott. How is Disney's canon mixed with Dungeons and Dragons canon? I'm about to tell you. All right, here we go. So I'm going to present the evidence that I believe exists to support my opinion. Here we go. Book of Many Things. Hugely influential, highly important Dungeons and Dragons canon, canon, canon by every metric. Canon, D&D canon. Okay? Hardback. Okay? All right. There's no question that the Book of Many Things is canon. It's canon, right? By the words of Jeremy Crawford, who is one of the D&D architects, okay? All right. So by his metric, by the box of D&D canon he drew, right? All right. So, Book of Many Things says, how do you run Dungeons and Dragons? Well, let us tell you how. You mix it with Magic the Gathering cards. Which Magic the Gathering cards? Any Magic Gathering cards. The book does not say this set, not that set. It says Magic the Gathering cards. All right, so D&D canon book is saying Magic the Gathering cards are used to run Dungeons and Dragons. Here's how you do it. Okay? Let's talk about the most important Magic the Gathering card that was ever printed. All right? It was the Fortnite Cube. So there is a Magic the Gathering the Magic the Gathering card with the Fortnite Cube on it. There's a Fortnite set of Magic the Gathering cards. Okay? That cube, right, prints right on itself that it's the Fortnite Cube existing in the Fortnite world, right? And the planar bridge, which exists in Magic the Gathering, which has multiple settings that are canon to Dungeons and Dragons. Strixhaven, Dominaria, Innistrad, list goes on and on and on and on and on. Okay, and D&D's canon being mixed with Fortnite used to rely on this tenuous link, right? But now Book of Many Things has said, you use Magic the Gathering cards in Dungeons and Dragons. Here's how you do it, right? So logically, in my humble opinion, you just pick up the Fortnite Cube card, you put that into your Dungeons and Dragons game, and then every single thing in Fortnite brushes right up against D&D canon, right? You following that? You know what's in Fortnite? Marvel, everything in Marvel, right? Marvel, the Marvel world, is all up in Fortnite, right? What else is in Fortnite? Star Wars. These are Disney's most valuable properties. The connection of D&D canon to Marvel canon and Star Wars canon is very direct, in my humble opinion. We have a gumbo. We have an intellectual property gumbo. Mordenkainen and Spider-Man and Luke Skywalker sitting at a table having drinks together is, in my humble opinion, 100% canon. Right? And all the corporations knew what they were doing when they set this up. The question is, we were sold this, right? We were sold this in Dungeons and Dragons, and we were sold this in Magic the Gathering. Are we smart enough to recognize what they put in the box? I am, right? So that's my point, right? Dungeons and Dragons canon is very carefully, very directly mixed with Disney canon. In addition to that, Disney Lorcana came and then literally mirrored Magic the Gathering, right? So there's a lot of links between Dungeons and Dragons canon and Disney's canon. So once we realize that any harm that comes to Disney's canon will harm Dungeons and Dragons canon, then I think the answer is complete? The answer, in my humble opinion, is that I, as a dungeon master, and you, as a dungeon master, and I, as a dungeon performer, and you, as a dungeon performer, need to be very invested, very concerned, right? And be very aware of Disney's woes. Because Disney's woes are very directly Dungeons and Dragons woes. Very, very direct. Okay? And so in my humble opinion, dungeon masters and dungeon performers need to get very invested and need to care immediately and urgently and deeply about Disney woes, Disney corporate woes. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. I'm proud of it. It's important, but it's not nearly as important as when you give me your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.